here we are in the 1980s and 90s enjoying this temporary rescue from the North Sea and Alaska and some other areas of the world. Venezuela was selling us a lot of oil, and West Africa had been steadily developed, although, West Africa was increasingly chaotic, and it became increasingly hard to get the oil out of these chaotic nations, where the pipelines were constantly being shot up and people were tapping into them and stealing the oil, and the oil executives were spending 99% of their time running around madly paying bribes to local tribesmen to not wreck the drilling equipment and the pumping equipment and the terminals and stuff. Anyway, along comes Ronald Reagan and Reaganism and tells Americans that it's morning in America again, and we're going to resume this program of being a drive-in, pleasure-seeking society, and that we can do it. We can be number one. This really sets into motion a kind of a wishful psychology that is still with us today, and if anything, has only become more pronounced and more dangerous. I call it the Jiminy Cricket syndrome. If you wish upon a star, your dreams will come true. I think what needs to be pointed out is that it's astonishing when you really look at it how deeply these themes now reverberate through American life, and to a very pernicious degree, to the point where gambling has now become a normative recreational activity all over America. To be blunt about it, gambling is based on a childish belief that it's possible to get something for nothing. This is where a lot of the ideas about the alternative fuel economy come from. The hydrogen economy is a wishful thinking idea. A lot of people who ought to know better believe that we're going to be rescued by alternative fuels or some kind of systems that will run them. There isn't going to be a hydrogen economy. Any way that you figure it, it takes more energy to produce the hydrogen than you get from the hydrogen under any known possible way of getting it. I think the important thing that we have to pay attention to is that even if the great geniuses of the world came up with some miracle fuel or method for replacing the oil we use now, probably isn't going to happen before we go through some kind of interval of hardship and disorder. I think it's unfortunate that we're putting so much energy into thinking how we're going to keep the current system running, rather than really imagining what will be necessary to do in our society, which is we're going to have to downscale and rescale every activity in American life. And the sooner we get to that project, the sooner that we're going to have a chance to carry forward this enterprise of civilization. Where agriculture is concerned, we're now at the mercy of a kind of industrial agriculture that is addicted to oil and gas inputs, as they call the fertilizers and the pesticides and stuff. This is the Archer Daniel Midland Cargill giant corporate model of agriculture, where you're using enormous farms with sterile soils as growth mediums, and you're pouring immense quantities of artificial pesticides and fertilizers on these growth mediums and producing a lot of corn so you can make cheese doodles and Pepsi-Cola. Or we're massively irrigating places in the Central Valley of California and even Arizona, the desert. That model of agriculture is very unlikely to persist. And there's no question that we're going to have to grow much more of our food closer to home. The question of comparing America's prospects with Europe are very interesting, because Europe did two things that are terribly important that we did not do. First of all, Europe did not destroy its cities and towns, nor did it destroy the idea of the city and town as a viable and acceptable human habitat. Secondly, Europe promoted and subsidized local agriculture to a large extent. Not completely. They still do some quite a bit of industrial agriculture, but they also supported local agriculture and the value-added activities that go with it, you know, turning those local products into food products. And we're now at the mercy of, you know, a very, very small number of corporate entities who are in charge of our food supply. It was very little noticed in 2002, I believe, it might have been 2003, but I think it was 2002, that the price of natural gas doubled that year when we had an extremely severe winter. But there was something else going on. Little known to most Americans, almost all of the fertilizer in America is made out of natural gas. You treat natural gas with nitrogen, and you end up with this ammonia-like product that is artificial fertilizer. And in 2002, when the price of natural gas shot up, many of the fertilizer plants in America shut down and moved to the Persian Gulf, where the gas was cheaper. So now, not only are we at the mercy of the Persian Gulf nations for our oil, but to a much larger extent than 10 years ago, for the fertilizer that we use to grow our food.